This video was made possible with the support of our amazing patrons. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. Hello everybody and welcome to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name's Martin.
And my name is Alex.
Today's video contains a lot of crazy clone effects that result in some very bizarre situations. With that being said, let's take a look at those opening hands. My commander is Brudiclad, Telcore Engineer. I keep an opening hand of Chasm Skulker, Wing Splicer, Swiftfoot Boots, Shrewd Negotiation, Evolving Wilds, an Island and a Mountain.
My commander is Animar, Soul of Elements. My opening hand contains Ice Feather Aven, Peer, Imaginative Rascal, Wood Elves, Primordial Sage, Breeding Pool, Spire Bluff Canal, and an Island.
Steven is playing his Anafenza Kin Tree Spirit deck. He keeps an opening hand containing Silverblade Paladin, Sublime Archangel, Unexpected Absence, Eerie Interlude and 3 planes.
And finally, Danny's commander is the Mimeoplasm. His opening hand consists of Archfiend of Depravity, Stitched Together, Choked Estuary, Reflecting Pool, Opulent Palace, Temple of the False God, and a Forest.
Alex wins the die roll and starts things off by playing an untapped Breeding Pool, taking 2 damage. He then casts Birds of Paradise and then passes the turn.
Steven plays a Plains and then ends his turn.
I play Evolving Wilds and immediately sacrifice it to put an island into play. I then pass to Danny.
Danny plays Opulent Palace and then passes to me.
Alex plays Spire Bluff Canals, casts Wood Elves and puts the Stomping Ground into play tapped. He then ends his turn.
Steven plays a Plains and then casts his commander, Anafenza Kin Tree Spirit. He then passes to Martin.
I play an island and then cast Dance of Many. I make a copy of Anafenza and then pass the turn.
Danny plays Choked Estuary and ends his turn.
Alex plays an island and then casts his commander, Animar Soul of Elements. Moving to combat, Alex attacks Danny with his Wood Elves, dealing him 1 damage. He then passes to Steven.
In his turn, Steven plays a Plains. He then casts Silverblade Paladin, soul bonding it to Anafenza, and triggering Anafenza's bolster ability. Steven puts a +1/+1 counter on Anafenza and then moves to combat. He attacks Martin with his commander, and Martin blocks with his own Anafenza. Martin then sacrifices his Dance of Many, and Steven ends his turn.
I begin my turn by playing a mountain, and then cast Chasm Skulker. I then pass to Danny.
Danny plays Command Tower and then passes the turn.
Alex starts his turn by casting Peer, Imaginative Rascal. He puts 2 +1/+1 counters on Animar, although it should only have been 1 given that Peer was not yet on the battlefield. Bad Alex. He chooses not to search his library for Toothy, Imaginary Friend, and casts Toothy from his hand, having naturally drawn it. Alex puts 2 more +1/+1 counters on Animar and casts Solemn Simulacrum for free. He puts a further 2 +1/+1 counters on Animar, puts a forest into play from his library, and then moves to combat. Alex once again attacks Danny with his Wood Elves and attacks Steven with Animar. Danny takes 1 damage and Steven, who is unable to block thanks to Animar's protection from white, takes 7. Alex then ends his turn.
Steven plays Soul Ring and then casts Sublime Archangel. Anafenza's bolstered trigger puts a +1/+1 counter on his Paladin, and Steven then moves to combat. He attacks Danny with Anafenza, who becomes a 6/6 with double strike thanks to exalted triggers, dealing Danny 12 damage. Steven then passes to Martin.
I draw for turn, putting a +1/+1 counter on my squid. Next I cast Blasphemous Act, dealing 13 damage to everyone's creatures, wiping the board. Alex draws a card from his Sad Robot's ability, and I create a 1/1 squid with Island Walk. Not yet finished, I cast Swiftfoot Boots and then end my turn.
In his turn, Danny plays Reflecting Pool, and then passes to me.
Alex replays his commander, and then ends his turn.
Steven also replays his commander, and then casts Relic of Progenitus. Danny responds by casting Price of Fame, destroying Anafenza. Steven puts her into the graveyard, and Danny puts the top 2 cards of his library into his graveyard. Steven then passes to Martin.
I begin my turn by casting Izzet Signet, and then move to combat. I attack Alex with my squid, which he is unable to block given that he controls an island. He takes 1 damage and I move to my post-combat main phase. I equip my boots to the squid and then end my turn.
Danny plays Temple of the False God, and then casts Archfiend of Depravity. About time he joined the game. Danny then passes the turn.
For his turn, Alex casts a morphed card. He puts a +1/+1 counter on Animar and then moves to combat. Alex attacks me with Animar, dealing me 2 damage, and then passes to Steven. Steven responds by activating Relic of Progenitus, targeting Danny to try and remove some value from Mimeoplasm. Danny exiles the Simic Signet in his graveyard, and Steven then proceeds to his turn.
Steven starts his turn by casting Karmic Guide, returning Anafenza to the battlefield. He then passes the turn.
I cast Vizier of Many Faces, having it enter as a copy of Animar. I then move to combat, once again attacking Alex with my squid. I deal him 1 damage and then pass to Danny.
Danny plays an island and then casts the Scarab God. Moving to combat, Danny attacks me with his demon, dealing me 5 damage. Danny then ends his turn.
In his turn, Alex flips his morphed card, revealing it to be Ice Feather Aven. He bounces Danny's demon back to his hand, plays another morphed card, puts a +1/+1 counter on Animar and moves to combat. Alex attacks Danny with Animar, dealing him 3 damage and then passes the turn.
Steven responds to his Karmic Guide's echo trigger by casting Eerie Interlude. He exiles the angel, draws for his turn, and then casts Mind Stone. Steven then ends his turn returning Karmic Guide to the battlefield. He returns Silverblade Paladin to play, triggering Bolster twice. He puts a +1/+1 counter on Anafenza and a +1/+1 counter on his Paladin. Steven then passes to Martin.
I play a mountain and then cast Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. I put a +1/+1 counter on my Animar clone and then move to combat. I once again attack Alex with my squid, he takes 1 damage, and I then end my turn.
Danny plays Opal Palace, and then targets Steven's Sublime Archangel with his Scarab God's ability. Steven responds by using his Relic of Progenitus to exile everyone's graveyards, and Danny, not having any of this, responds by activating his Scarab God's ability once more, targeting the Angel. He makes a 4/4 Sublime Archangel token that is a black zombie in addition to its other types, and passes the turn.
Alex begins his turn by casting Endless One, where X is 2. He puts a +1/+1 counter on Animar, casts Soul of the Harvest, and puts another +1/+1 counter on his commander. Next he casts Progenitor Mimic, putting another +1/+1 counter on Animar and drawing a card. Alex has the Mimic enter as a copy of the zombified Sublime Archangel, and then moves to combat. He attacks Danny with his commander, who becomes a 12/12 thanks to Exalted triggers. Danny takes 12 damage, and Alex, feeling rather satisfied with himself, ends his turn.
Steven sacrifices his Karmic Guide rather than paying its echo cost, and then casts Grafted Exoskeleton. Everyone groans in disgust, and Steven equips the artifact to Anafenza before passing to Martin.
I move straight to combat, attacking Danny with my Animar clone and Alex with my squid. Danny takes 2, Alex takes 1, and I move to my second main phase. I cast Shrewd Negotiations, swapping control of my Swiftfoot boots with Alex's Animar. I forget that the boots should still be attached to my squid and sacrifice my copy of Animar before ending my turn.
Danny scries 1 in his upkeep, and everyone else takes a damage thanks to his Scarab God's ability. He then plays a forest, recasts Archfiend of Depravity, and then uses the Scarab God's ability to make a zombified copy of Vizier of Many Faces. He has the Vizier enter as a copy of Kazul, and then passes the turn.
In his upkeep, Alex makes another copy of his zombified Archangel as a result of his Mimic's ability. Moving to combat, Alex attacks me with his Ice Feather Aven. Alex refuses to pay 3 mana to Kazul, I make a 3/3 Ogre, and then take 14 damage given that each of Alex's creatures has 2 lots of Exalted. In his second main phase, Alex casts Ixodron. All non-token creatures are turned face down, Ixodron becomes an 11/11, and Alex passes to Steven.
Steven draws for his turn, and then passes without doing anything.
I begin my turn by casting Wing Splicer, creating a 3/3 Golem. Next I cast Retrofitter Foundry, and then end my turn.
Danny plays a forest, and then casts Thief of Sanity. He then moves to combat, attacking me with his Archangel, who becomes a 9/9 thanks to Exalted triggers. I choose not to block, taking 9 damage, and Danny then passes the turn.
Alex plays Reliquary Tower, and then casts Xenagos, the Reveler. He uses Xenagos' +1 ability, adding 6 green and 1 red mana to his mana pool, and then casts Zorak Dragonclaw. Alex then flips Ice Feather Aven, returning my Golem token to my hand. token ceases to exist and Alex moves to combat, attacking me with his 1818 Trampoly Ixodron. I block the massive illusion with my Ogre, the face down Animar, and my other face down creature. I take 6 damage and all of my blocking creatures are destroyed. Alex then passes to Steven, who responds by sacrificing his Mind Stone, drawing a card, and then moves to his turn.
In his turn, Steven casts Knight of the White Orchid. He searches his library for a plains, puts it onto the battlefield, and ends his turn.
I start my turn by playing Sulphur Falls, and then cast Rite of Replication. I make a copy of Alex's copy of Danny's copy of Steven's Sublime Archangel, which is also a 4/4 black zombie in addition to its other types. Everyone at the table has a good laugh, and I then pass to Danny.
Danny plays a forest and then moves to combat. He attacks Steven with his Thief of Sanity, which becomes a 7/7 due to exalted triggers. Lacking flyers, Steven takes 7 damage and Danny looks at the top 3 cards of Steven's library. He exiles one face down, puts the other 2 in Steven's graveyard, and then moves to his post-combat main phase. Danny casts the Tragic Arrogance that he stole from Steven, allowing Martin to keep his zombified Archangel clone and his signet, me to keep my Ice Feather Aven, Xenagos and Swiftfoot Boots, Steven to keep his Soul Ring and his face down Anafenza, and himself to keep a zombified Archangel. Steven responds by casting Unexpectedly Absent on his own Knight, putting it on top of his library. Steven's exoskeleton is then sacrificed, causing Anafenza to be destroyed as well. Danny then casts his commander, the Mimeoplasm. He has it enter as a copy of Archfiend of Depravity with 2 +1/+1 counters on it by exiling his Thief of Sanity. Finally finished, Danny ends his turn.
Alex begins his turn by activating Xenagos' +1 ability, adding 1 green mana to his mana pool. He then recasts his commander and passes to Steven.
Steven replays his Knight of White Orchid, searching his library for a plains and putting it onto the battlefield. He then casts Cathar's Crusade and passes the turn.
In my turn, I cast my commander, Brudiclad Telcor Engineer. Moving to combat, I create a 2/1 Mia token and then have both of my tokens become copies of my 4/4 Sublime Archangel. I attack Danny with one of my angels, which becomes a 10/10 thanks to exalted triggers. Danny blocks it with his own angel, and I then move to my end step. I sacrifice the angel that had attacked to Archfiend of Depravity's ability, and then pass to Danny.
Danny begins his turn by casting Stitch Together, returning the Scarab God to his hand. He then recasts the Scarab God and uses his ability to make a copy of my Progenitor Mimic, and has the Mimic enter as a copy of Martin's Sublime Archangel. In other words, Danny has made a copy of Martin's copy of my copy of Danny's copy of Steven's Sublime Archangel. Danny then moves to combat, attacking Martin with his Archfiend. Martin blocks with his Angel, and Danny ends his turn.
Alex uses Xenagos' +1 ability to add 2 green mana to his mana pool, and then casts Vesuvian Shapeshifter, putting a +1/+1 counter on Animar. He has it enter as a copy of, you guessed it, Sublime Archangel, plays a morphed card, and puts another +1/+1 counter on his commander. Moving to combat, Alex attacks Danny with Animar, which he is unable to block. Danny takes 7 damage, knocking him out of the game, and Alex then moves to his second main phase. He equips his Swiftfoot Boots to Animar, and then passes the turn.
Steven draws a card for his turn, and once again passes without doing anything.
I start my turn by casting Dragon Master Outcast, and then cast Trail of Evidence. I then move to combat, create a 2/1 Mia, and pass to Alex.
In my turn, I activate Xenagos' -6 ability, exiling the top 7 cards of my library. I put Rootbound Crag and a Mountain into play, followed by Fathom Seer, Mistfire Weaver, Whisperwood Elemental, and Abzan Beastmaster. Next, I cast Ancestral Statue, and watch the light drain from my opponent's eyes. I put a +1/+1 counter on Animar, return the statue to my hand, and repeat the process a ridiculous amount of times. Moving to combat, I attack Steven with my insanely large commander, which he cannot block given that it has protection from white. Steven is knocked out of the game, and I then move to my end step. I manifest the top card of my library, and then pass the turn.
In my upkeep, I make a 5/5 dragon with Dragon Master Outcast's ability. I then move straight to combat, creating another 2/1 Mia, and have all 3 of my tokens become 5/5 dragons. I then end my turn.
I begin my turn by casting Primordial Sage, putting a +1/+1 counter on Animar. Martin responds to the Sage by casting Confirm Suspicions, and I respond by unmorphing Void Mage Apprentice, countering the counterspell. I then play and bounce my statue multiple times, drawing until I find Decimator of the Provinces, which I then cast. This gives Animar +2/+2 and, more importantly, Trample, which allows me to attack Martin for lethal damage despite any blockers, winning me the game.
Well, that's it for another game. If you liked it, then be sure to give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Sublime Archangel shenanigans in the future. Also, check out our Twitter, @4commander, and feel free to support us on Patreon, links in the description. We'll see you next time.